I'll take the usual 30 seconds to make sure I'm live. There's this delay to people that are new between the time when I hit start the live stream and when it goes live. So if you sense a few seconds of awkward silence, that's what I'm trying to make sure that we're live. I can hear myself on one spot. Let me make sure the registration page is good. Uh, this is worrying. I don't see the other place being live. Let me look into that real quick. I'll take 1 minute to debug this. If not, I'll continue live on YouTube. So please give me one quick minute to figure this out. I have run into an issue with the live stream, so that's what I'm trying to solve it real quick. All right. I put in a fix. Let me see if that worked. I'm hoping that should have worked. To anyone else who's waiting, there's been a mistake in setting up the live stream, and that's what I'm trying to fix right now. Okay, I'll continue on YouTube because I wanted to make sure it's live for the registrants, but it's not, so I don't want to waste Amit's time. Who's saying hello? Hey Amit, thanks for joining us. Let's get started. Sorry about that, everyone. We also have a registration page which sends you weekly reminders, and for some reason I'm not able to live stream there. I was trying to debug that, but that didn't go well. So I'm continuing regardless. Welcome back to the paper reading group. I am excited to be back in my chai office. I'm live streaming for the chai office now for anyone that's aware. I was traveling. That's why we didn't have the last paper reading group. For today, we're reading the paper titled Politeness Transfer, a tag and generate approach. That is the title of the paper. This is by Madan, sorry, et al. There are a few co-authors. I've actually interviewed the lead author, Aman Madan, on Chat Time Data Science, so you're welcome to check that interview out. For today, we'll be covering this paper, and like always, I have received feedback about having a shorter summary of the paper. So let me real quick summarize the paper for anyone that's watching and doesn't want to spend an hour watching this video. Let me share the correct screen. And this should be the one. Scrolling down to the summary area. This figure inside the paper, again, this is from the archive, and I'll point everyone to that link. But summarizing the paper, this paper aims at making sentences polite. So taking a sentence that's not exactly polite, or maybe sometimes it's rude, and you want to make it more polite. That's a very interesting problem to solve, and we'll learn why that is. But here's the summary of how the paper does it. So it takes a sentence. As you can see here, X1 is the non polite sentence. Then it's adding a tagger. So it tags the sentences that it, or words, sorry. So it takes the sentence that's non polite, puts in a tag. So here's the intermediate representation, right? Let me pick up my pen and switch to draw. Awesome. Um, so it creates this intermediate representation, right? And from there, there's a stage 2 where you use a generator. And now you have this tag, right? And this could be similar to, so if you're familiar with NLP, if you're not, look at our Hugging Face study group. Wade has taught a lot of stuff there. But this is how tagging is usually done in NLP. You see unknown or similar tags. The generator generates a few words and adds it there. So I know this is blurred. The I think OneNote doesn't like having high risk. So I'll read out the sentence for everyone. The input sentence is send me the data. We add a tag in front, and then the generator adds, could you please send me the data? So we've made the sentence more polite. Another approach, another example, we want to replace negative words and make them positive. So it says their chips are okay, but their sales are really sorry. Their salsa is really bland. It's really low resolution, so even I can't read. Their salsa is really bland. Salsa shouldn't be bland. So the intermediate representation is their chips are tag, but this salsa is really tag, right? So we've the tagger has identified the negative words, right? Okay and bland, and replace them with the tag. Then in the stage two, we take a generator which replaces this with their chips are great, but their salsa is really delicious. Uh, Maybe not a good idea for a restaurant that wants honest feedback, but if you're trying to change your review and create more positive impact in the world, that's how you change that. Although in this case, you should be more honest. Uh, that's an ethical debate. Here's this is how the model works. So this was the summary for anyone who had 2 minutes. I've summarized the paper. I hope you stick to the end of the video if you're watching the recap or live stream. But this is just to tell you what we'll be learning. And Amit is asking a great question. Is it like end of sentence tag? Yes, it's similar to that. Now, Weights and Biases is a MLOps company broadly. More in broadly speaking, it's a machine learning company, and we come to paper reading groups to learn about machine learning techniques. So, Sanyam, why the hell are we learning about how to make sentences polite? It's a nice thing to know, but where's the machine learning? We learn about this tagger and this generator are of course transformer models. And the way this is evaluated is also, it's actually a nice mix of a few techniques. So TF-IDF is being used. We learn what that is. If you don't know, don't worry about it. And for the generator approach, we are using transformer models, and I'll show that quickly as well. We'll jump around a bit. I'm giving the summary upfront just so that everyone is a bit prepared of what's coming. So let's find where that is. Oops, I scrolled past it. I'm trying to get to it fast, and I always worry about my scrolling speed because I know it blurs in the live stream. So pardon that, please. Here is the implementation detail. Again, giving the summary upfront, we'll come back and take a look at it. We use the authors, not me. They use a 4-layer transformer to train both tagger and generator models. And then they have the details of, okay, this has that many attention heads, this many embedding layers, hidden states, so on and so forth. So if you were curious about where is the machine learning in making the world a better place by making sentences more polite, this is how. So let me start with another question. Since Amit has been quite active, Amit or anyone else watching this, where else do you think this approach can be useful? Alternate question: why do you think I picked this paper? And this is a cool example, right? Making sentences more polite. But where else do you think this approach, not knowing what it is exactly, can be useful? I'll just wait for one answer, if at all, and if not, I'll continue. Meanwhile, let me switch to the correct screen. Again, there are no wrong answers or wrong questions, so please feel free to say anything at all. The question was, where else can this approach be useful? Maybe YouTube live chat. Yeah, that is a place where this can be applied. I was thinking more in terms of um, examples where it can be demonstrated. So at the end of the paper, the authors actually show a few examples. I see Yuvraj, who's one of our most active members. Welcome back, Yuvraj. His answer is, uh, if something is offensive, it can be mellowed down. That's a great answer. So yes, for politeness answer, yes. But what I was trying to allude to, maybe I didn't frame the question correctly. So this can also be used to make sentences less political and similar areas. So where you can tag parts of sentences and remove those few things. So again, your applications are correct. I didn't frame my question correctly, but it's not just limited to politeness transfer. It can be transferring anything within certain limits. But yeah. And Amit is asking, how do I join the study group? Anyone and everyone is welcome to join at least all of the study groups I host. And if my colleagues don't allow you into any of the study groups they are hosting, send me a message and I'll add you. I'm kidding about that. Our study groups are open to everyone. So let's get started with the detailed walkthrough. I've already introduced the paper and summarized it. That's the target. You can look it up. If you've received the email or if you're watching on YouTube, it should be linked in the description or in the email you all have received. Just to remind you, last paper reading group, we looked at Swing Transformer, and this was in March because in April I was not in my chai office. And before that, we looked at convex. So if you're curious about these recent papers, you can also check them out. The agenda for today, I've already covered the first point, but the next few are we'll learn what politeness transfer exactly is. We'll get an overview of the implementation and we'll get a few suggested homework. I always suggest that. Sometimes some people do it. Yuvraj definitely does it. I always look forward to his papers. Sorry, his blog posts. Maybe I can convince Amit as well to write blog posts now. So we'll see. We'll see in a few days if he writes a blog post or not. Amit has another great answer to my previous question. Maybe converting English text to proper Hindi sentence. That's a great answer. Yep. See, as you can see, it's this technique. The reason I picked this paper was it's not just this one example where it's useful. It extends beyond that, and the authors also cover this in the paper. So inside this glossary, I think maybe the glossary or maybe before that, the part that no one actually gets to most of the time while reading a paper, they show it extends well beyond this. So it's not just the siloed technique. And before we start with this, I also want to quickly mention to everyone Kaggle Grandmaster, the first notebooks Grandmaster, Heads or Tails, is currently hosting a competition around storytelling. Weights and Biases is sponsoring that and also has been supporting the competition. So if you'd like to get started on that, there are two videos or two live streams, one with Grandmaster and Dada and one with Heads or Tails Martin Hens himself. So please check those out if you're interested in taking part in a storytelling Kaggle competition. Coming back to the reading group, the resources I've used are we'll go through the paper, we'll go through the official repository. I rewatched my interview from 2 years ago with the lead author, so you can literally go to my channel and look the paper's name up. It should show up. Although I don't try to promote my stuff too much, so if you don't find the link, reach out. But I don't think I put the link in the emails. So let me start by asking a question to everyone. What is transfer learning and how can we do style transfer in text? I'll answer these questions in the next slide. Let me actually hide that. Can't scroll past that. But the question to everyone is what is transfer learning in the case of NLP? How can we do style transfer and how does text generation works? Amit says he'll reach out on Twitter. Please do. So for me, these few seconds are always freakish because By the time I'm saying something, and by the time I get a reply, it's 20 seconds, and I'm trying to make sure if I should wait or answer that. So I'll wait a few more seconds before I embarrass myself. These are the questions that I'm setting up to answer later on to help set up the paper walkthrough better. Okay, awesome. I'll continue still because I assume a few answers will come in, but I'll get started regardless. So the first question was a bit of a trick question because this is not really transfer learning. In transfer learning, usually you take a pre-trained model and you apply that. We already have an answer from our most active users, so I'll highlight that. Yuvraj says transfer learning in NLP is when you have a larger network trained on a large corpus and then you fine tune it. That's the perfect answer. That's the textbook answer. Thanks, Yuvraj. And Amit answers his answer. I'm trying to read and summarize it. It's also the correct answer. So thanks, Amit. Both of these answers are right. So the point I was trying to make here is in this paper, I was quite confused between transfer learning and what's happening in this politeness transfer thing. Just to make it clear to everyone who doesn't understand this, in transfer learning, as Yuvraj and Amit have answered, you take a model that's been trained and you apply it to a target problem. Here, we're doing something similar, but not exactly. So we're not using a pre-trained model and throwing it at a different problem. We are transferring one format. Let me move this out of the way. One format of a sentence to another. And we're using two models as I showed earlier to do that. So this is different from transfer learning. It's not transfer learning, although the models are pre-trained. So the entire process is not transfer learning, but parts of it involve that. Just to make the jargon clear, it's not quite relevant, but it's good to know. Here, the style transfer is quite different. So style transfer, again, is something else if you look up the textbook definition. But we are making sentences more polite. So we are transferring the style of polite sentences. Somewhat similar, exact textbook definition is different, just to make it clear to everyone. The third question, how does text generation work? So let me again move the screen around. Yuvraj has an answer, so I'll just use that. When you prompt a large language model with a text input and end up having the model complete the sentence, that's the correct answer. And how does this happen? Is the model checks the probability and continues generating words. There are a few more complications than this. Simplified version, you give a prompt, the model looks at the prompt, looks at the words, it checks the probability of what could be possibly the next word, few more things beyond that, gives the word, continues onwards. Sometimes inside of this, there are a few tags generated, there are a few tokens generated, and it continues like so. So the reason why I mentioned that was we looked at having that tag inside of the sentence while performing politeness transfer. It's somewhat similar to text generation. So it's good to have that relevant background. If again you are new to all of this, I can't possibly cover all of this, but we have already on our wonderful YouTube channel. Let me hide my subscriptions. Okay, no, I can recommend these channels for entertainment. Nothing, nothing interesting going on there. Thankfully, so many of these. I'd encourage you to check out our Hugging Face study group where we have covered the basics of NLP and beyond. So if you're unaware of this, it's completely fine to ask that right now. I can't possibly teach it in 1 hour. So you're welcome to ask those questions still, or go to those videos and ask again later. Yuvraj adds, there are multiple ways to completing the sentence. It can be a greedy search or beam search, or simply sampling the vocab available. That's a great answer. For this case, I believe the authors use, I had it written. I think it was beam search. I might be wrong about that. I'll double check once we read that section. So the reason I asked these questions was, again, I'm going to the latest version of Fast AI, and there I was reminded asking questions first and then getting to the answers helps you remember things better. So I'm always trying to improve our approach here with the people reading group. Here are the answers. We've already discussed how style transfer works. I'll elaborate a bit on why is this an interesting task, and then we'll discuss the last 2 points before reading the paper. Why am I going through all of this? This is the relevant background you need for the paper. And if you go through the paper that it links off to, so the citation graph, you'll learn this. But since you're here, I don't want you to spend that time, and I want you to go away with as much learning in 1 hour. So I'll summarize all of these points. Why is this again an interesting task? Could you possibly throw a end-to-end transformer model to do all of this? So the authors actually create a data set, again, having a non-polite sentence and target polite sentence. Could you possibly throw a transformer model and make this an end-to-end task? Maybe with enough compute, most definitely. But here they're using a tagging and generator approach. And as we have discussed, this is quite effective beyond these few tasks. So, for example, we discussed this can make sentences less political, which is quite more important these days. It can convert sentences from English to Hindi, as Amit had pointed out. This is quite useful. And why is this an interesting task? Again, sorry about that. It is quite challenging to have a model identify a specific part of the sentence that is non-polite or polite, tag that and replace that without translating or changing the complete meaning of the sentence. That is the challenge that they have accepted here. This paper is from 2 years ago. Larger models and much higher accuracy stuff has come out since, but the basis is still important. So that's why this, in my opinion, is an interesting problem. Let's look at TF-IDF. I won't go into the mathematical definition of it. You can look it up. I understand it every time I read, and as soon as I close that tab, I forget the formula. So I won't embarrass myself. But as you're going through a document and as you're building a vocab for your model, you would like to assign importance to different words. With TF-IDF, you perform a certain division based on frequency, throwing broad jargon out there because I don't want to remember the formula. You can look it up. And it's quite intuitive once you've worked through a problem. So if you actually take a piece of paper and write all of this down, you can understand it. But let's say in your sentence or in your document, chai appears once. I said it thrice already in this video, but it is the most important thing, right? So how do you give it that importance covered to all of the other words you compare? One of the obvious ways is you divide it by its by the general appearances of by the frequency or general number of appearances of other words. Again, I am highlighting how it works and not exactly the formula, so it might be slightly different. But by dividing that, for example, in a novel, how do you understand who's the hero or who's the protagonist of the story? TF-IDF is helpful for that. And that is used in the paper. That's why I'm talking about it. It's not irrelevant. And we've already covered the tag and generator approach. So here is the background knowledge again to summarize. We are doing somewhat of a style transfer, somewhat of transfer learning, but the problem statement as framed is not transfer learning. So making sentence more polite, I don't think the textbook definition is transfer learning. We are using pre-trained models, but don't mix the jargon because I think in the paper the literature gets confusing at some point. I understand most of the people know this, but this is just to clarify it for people that are still new to machine learning. So I have to make sure that they don't come back and start screaming at me. So I'm sorry if you already knew this. This is an interesting task because it extends beyond, well beyond politeness transfer. And it's a two-stage approach, which now we'll read in depth. So now I'll switch sharing screen, then go to the paper. I'll give 30 seconds while I sip my chai for any questions. So any questions so far? We also have the big boss from Weights and Biases. Lavanya says I'm doing a great job. So thank you, Lavanya. Any questions so far with what we've discussed? Okay, I'll continue further, but just to emphasize, since I see some new names here, there are no stupid questions. So please feel free to ask as many. If we run out of time, I'll reply to your questions on Twitter or LinkedIn or email or wherever you want to write them to me. So please keep the questions coming. Quick recap on style transfer. Um, Style transfer, in my understanding, is used more for GANs historically. That might not be true for NLP, but I wanted to emphasize that usually it's about taking a picture by a certain artist and having your photo and applying this style to that picture. We're doing somewhat of a similar task here. And the thing we are not doing is transfer learning in the complete pipeline. I'm not sure if that clarifies it or makes it more confusing. Um, Feel free to ask again, Amit, if that doesn't answer your question. So I'll start like always. How I read these papers, it usually, I'm a slow reader. I hope that's useful for everyone, but sometimes you would want to watch these at 2x speed. I pre-read the paper and make my notes. I have since switched to a digital tablet. This is not a promotion. I really like this one. It's remarkable. And I take my notes and then again highlight those as I read through the important points here. So that's what we'll do now. I'll go through the important bits, in my opinion, and highlight those while we read through this paper's important sections. So I don't like the highlighter. Let's use the pen. So this paper introduces a new task of politeness transfer, which involves, I should actually use the highlighter, converting non-polite sentences to polite sentences while preserving the meaning. And they have also created a data set. So one of the suggested homeworks from me would be to download this data set and actually work on it. Amit, I see your question. I'll come back to it afterwards. I would encourage you to, sorry, not do style transfer, but actually play around with this data set. The approach, as I mentioned earlier, is a tag and generate pipeline that identifies attributes and generates a new target. So in that sentence, it would identify that this is a number. Let's say we are trying to convert written new numbers to word representations for some reason, because you work at a fancy company and you don't want to do the obvious programming, so now you'll use a transform model at it and spend a month doing it. uh, Again, this is a joke and not intended to offend anyone. um, but in this sentence, your model would highlight the fact that this is a number, and then the generator would generate words that are literally the numbers written in words here. Later, the authors, of course, analyze this beyond a politeness answer, and they say for 5 other tasks, their model outperforms the SOTA models at that time. Usually, for anyone that's been attending the paper reading groups, I don't emphasize too much about the results, percentages, because this paper is 2 year old. Papers, machine learning moves really fast, and uh, I don't see a point in emphasizing on percentages, although it's of course really amazing that the authors have achieved such great results. So you can go through the results, but I won't highlight the numbers in absolute detail. So in the introduction, they talk about why is this an important task, and the history of how this has been done. The authors in this paper study the task of converting non-polite sentences to polite sentences. The key being while preserving the meaning. So, as you have seen already, the tagger only replaces or only tags a part of the sentence, and you don't have a. I wanted to say RNN or LSTM, that's not true nowadays, but you don't have a deep learning model replace the complete sentence word by word. It's only a part of it. That's how it differs from uh, the modern approaches. Why is this an interesting problem? Apart from what we've discussed already, this is a rich and multifaceted problem. And depending on if you're a native speaker or not, it changes a bit. So they allude to the fact that in North American, some uh, acts would be rude compared to the Arab culture. So it also really varies from culture to culture, and depending on this problem especially, if you're a native or non-native speaker, things change. So they circumscribe the scope. I was trying not to mess that word up. I did not. They circumscribe the scope of politeness by two things. They adapt a data-driven definition, and they use this data set. What is this data set? You can look it up, but it's a collection of emails from American corporation a few years ago. So hopefully the world was more polite then, and not less casual in emails. I think I've at least gotten less more casual in emails now. So in 2004, I would expect emails would be much more formal, so more polite. I hope most of them, unless someone wrote an upset email. So later on, they point out, based on a paper, it is easy to pinpoint the signals of politeness. However, that signal, the absence of politeness, like direct question, do not explicitly appear in a sentence and thus are hard to objectify. So words like please, or what else could be it? Thank you. Such words clearly make a sentence polite, but their absence is hard to identify, right? So, like, how is it a non polite sentence? Because you're not saying please. Or I would mark every sentence that has coffee in it as non polite. So, that's a strong signal for me. But apart from these extreme cases, how do you do that, right? In their study, again, what I'm doing here for transparency is I'm looking at my notes from the paper and just pointing those out. So this is literally the paper in my hand, and I'm pointing things out here. Not our, the authors, their study, they focus on in their study they focus on the task of transferring the non-polite sentences to polite sentences, where they simply define non-politeness to be the absence of both politeness and impoliteness. We've discussed this multiple times, what they're doing here, but here's how they define these things. So if you had literally thought about this for a minute, you would have immediately come to the point, oh, how do you define this, right? So here's how the author have done it. There could be a better approach, I think, but I couldn't come up with one, so I trust the authors. Again, their proposed approach is a tag and generate pipeline. The tagger identifies the words or phrases which belong to original style and replaces them. The generator takes this as an input and generates a sentence in the target style. So the generator, let's write here. Or okay, let's see if I can fit my handwriting in this margin. New challenge. The tagger takes the sentence and gives an output where parts of the sentence have a tag in them. Then the generator takes this output and replaces this with the styled word. So it's still the same sentence, but now it has, let's say, please or something like that, or I don't know, chai, something like that. Sorry, I opened this up. I opened a new tab up. I didn't want to do that. Um, Sorry about that. So you have the target sentence where the generator has replaced that particular word. Now I'll skip over the other details because I don't think these are relevant here. And they have also created a data set, like I mentioned, with a large number of examples. You can also take a look at the source code. I did, and today I won't be highlighting it because it's extremely readable. And again, the paper pretty much covers everything. So before I move on to the next section, I'll answer the questions that I see here. So going back to Amit's question, he had asked about style transfer, and he says Jeff Heaton's channel has covered this. Yes, that's the one we were talking about. Uh, Image style transfer. Jeff Heaton's channel is pretty amazing. I would highly encourage it to everyone. So highly recommend it to everyone. Yuvraj says this is what apps like Grammarly do with our sentences. I think he's right, especially if you have Grammarly Pro, because I have that. Uh, Not an advertisement for Grammarly. This is a company channel, so I have to I have to say this. But yeah, if you have the Grammarly Pro subscription, it actually tells you the tone of your sentence or document or whatever. Maybe these apps have rules instead of background. I think Grammarly has written about this. I'm not sure, but I think they use machine learning because it wasn't as good at it as it is now, and that I think only happens when you're using ML models. Again, Grammarly is pretty good now. I remember when it wasn't as good, meaning it's gotten better now. I assume that's because they use machine learning. An approach similar to the one can potentially be used to make our sentences more eloquent. Yeah, I think that's a great idea as well. One of the other ideas I had just based on your response was, and this could be really useful. You need to figure out the data set for this or whatnot. Taking a research paper and converting it into a blog post, meaning you replace the mathy jargon with stuff that is more readable. Uh, Sell that as a software and basically become a millionaire. I would buy that. Everyone would buy that. Jokes apart, I think that would be a really cool implementation if anyone wants to look into it. So again, I'm looking at my notes to check out what I want to compute highlight. So they talk about the related work here, and they've covered a few things. One of the things to highlight, and this is about from a previous covered work, they say the older work focuses on contextual dialogue response generation as opposed to content preserving style transfer. So these approaches take in the context and give a response and don't ensure that the original tone or style or whatnot is not changed. This is how their work differs. So people have, of course, worked on this problem earlier as well, but the author's approach is slightly different compared to that. So again, moving further, there is another approach I want to highlight, which is delete, retrieve, and generate (DRG). They say these are effective methods to generate outputs in target style with a high rate of source content preservation. However, these approaches delete, I assume, the words, retrieve them, and again generate them. I just read those words out, but that's what it sounds like. Uh, the limitation of the said older approaches is they often delete important words. So for example, in a sentence, you don't want to delete please or something like that, and it gets deleted, right? Uh, that's one of the things. I always get distracted with reading the chat and making sure I don't miss anything relevant. So I'm always reading the chat, and that's why I get a bit lost. Um, the second limitation is the retrieve step relies on presence of similar content in both source and target style, which of course, as you think of in examples, I've thought this through. We have 15 more minutes, so I won't elaborate, but try to think of this and you'll see that it's not always common. The retrieve step is time consuming for large data sets. We are contrasting and picking out the limitations of an older approach that is most similar to this. The pipeline makes assumption that style can't be transferred by deleting markers and replacing them with target style phrases. And then the method relies on fixed corpus of style attribute markers, and thus is limited to the ability to not being able to generalize to unseen data. So I'm trying to think of examples where use words other than please. Uh, I can't, but if you do, the older approach won't work. So, reading further, I don't think I want to highlight anything important from here. Again, I only highlight things that can maximize your learning in 1 hour and glance over other details. If you want, you can always go back and read the paper and Ask me anywhere any questions that you have. I'm always happy to answer as many questions. Looking at the chart, Jeff says there is a web app that makes simple language abstracts from complex text. Please do share it. I'd be curious to check this out. Sounds like my business idea was already taken, guys. I'm not becoming a founder anytime soon. um, is it like bird training process in DRG? I need to check the bird training process. Um, oh, sorry. You mean is the DRG similar to bird training? Uh, Somewhat, because you do use the QKV combination there. I think that's what you're referring to. And it does sound similar to that. And this was after the Transformers came out. So the paper, said paper is from 2018, and I assume it's important. Okay, let's continue further. So here they talk about how they have prepared the data set. And they say the Enron corpus consists of large set of email conversations exchanged by the employees. And this is the data set. How do they pre-process it? They use Spacey first to pre-process the data. And in the sub notes, I remember they had written this. So they tokenize using Spacey and then convert to lowercase. Then they prune the corpus. So again, the data set comes from Enron corpus, which is a bunch of emails. They pre-process it and then remove sentences that are short or have mostly numbers or have email addresses and had repeated occurrences. So basically, they remove all the garbage in pre-processing. That's what it sounds like. And then they use a politeness classifier to assign politeness scores into 10 buckets. So they rate these from P0 to P9, P9 being the most polite, P0 being the least polite. And they do this by using a classifier there. So to be conscious of time, I'm moving further, but this was all I wanted to cover here as well. If you're curious, you should check out this graph where they show the P0 bucket. Again, it's a bit blurred because OneNote doesn't like high resolution. And here's the P9 bucket, here's the P0 bucket. So for some reason, the classifier doesn't like the word power. California, interestingly enough, gas company, electricity, price as well. Polite words are quite obvious to me. Great, hope, thanks, good, no, stuff like that. So all of this makes sense. Um, just checking my notes to make sure is there anything else I want to highlight here. I don't think so. So I'll continue further. So here they've highlighted how they worked on the other tasks. This is quite straightforward. So I'll continue further. I'll talk about the methodology with a suggestion for everyone. So, because of the nature of how papers are written, the authors use notation like X1, X1. I'm even forgetting how this is called, what this is called, but X1 cap, I think. Uh, because of the limitations or the way how a paper is written, the authors use this. If you're trying to understand it, just write on a piece of paper polite sentence, non polite, target polite. Things will instantly start to make sense. Maybe all are smarter and you don't need to do that. You can keep this in your head. For me, I just couldn't understand what's, sorry about that. I pressed Control Z too many times and it scrolled to the bottom. So when you're trying to understand this, just if you have a problem, just replace it with the said words and it'll start to make sense. So they say we are given, here's the method that they use. again, one of the differences that I was expecting to come out from the question was, usually when you're doing transfer learning or style transfer or translation, you have a parallel set of words. So English to French, English to German, I think that's a standard data set. That's not the case here. So it's a non-parallel collection of sentences. They are given a non-parallel samples of sentences from styles non-polite and polite. So you have two samples, and your goal is to take this and convert this to p hat. Thanks for that answer, Amit. Or p hyphen. Let's just write p hat here. And they said this is done by using style SV, where V belongs to one or two. What is one? Let's say this. Let's say it's this, and two is this. So they begin by learning a set of phrases which characterize either this style or this style. And then they propose the approach of having a two-stage model, which we've already looked at, so I'll skip further. And this allows them to predict polite sentences. The key thing here is they trained two independent systems for the tagger and generator. So these are two different models, and it's not an end-to-end process. We've already covered this, so I'm just reading ahead if there's anything I want to highlight. But no, we've talked about this extensively. Key thing, tagger and generator are two separate systems. I'm rushing through because we're out of time and I don't want to go over. But again, ask any question you might want to. So again, we've gone through this approach. I'll glance over it again real quick. Stage one, the tagger adds. So there are two different possibilities. In the first sentence, which is really blurred, so I'll read it out. It says, send me the data. And here the tagger adds a tag ahead of it. And then you replace it. The other one is a replace tagger. So it identifies words that are negative. And then the replace tagger replaces these words with the set target. So there are two possibilities of how the tagger and generator work. Okay, now continuing further into the implementation, they talk about how do they estimate the style phrases, how do they do the style invariant tagged sentence generation, and then how do they do the style targeted generation. I will rush through this a bit. If you end up reading the paper, which I hope you should, it's a great paper. What was helpful for me was just glancing over the math and looking at the source code. So the source code is linked at the top of the paper. If you read it, TF-IDF, for me at least, made more sense in the Pythonic code than this scary jargon. So this defines how this works in math, how this approach works for style estimating style phrases. But if you look at the code, for me, it was more intuitive like that. The code, again, is very well documented by the authors. So for the given corpus pair, polite and non-polite sentences in the set style, they compute a probability distribution present in both the corpora. And they do this by using some math magic, which involves TF-IDF and styles. I'll skip the style invariant tagged sentence as well, because again, it's obvious as long as you skip the math. Uh, I did that, it worked okay for me. And here they talk about how are they creating training data for art tagger. So for this image, they take the input sentence and remove the words where they want to add a tag. And then in the target output, they replace it with the tag phrase. So this happens inside the model, and we only see the output, but internally, it first removes the sentences and then adds a tag. Basically, that's how replacement works. If it's a two-step process, that is how it's being replaced. I'll skip over style targeted generation because it's not that relevant. So coming to experiments and results, they compare the systems against DRG, style transfer through back translation, and style transfer from non-parallel text by cross alignment. Um, I haven't read these papers, so I understand they are relevant to this one, but again, I don't have the relevant context to share here. If you want, you're welcome to read this. The reason I said that was one thing I've learned by following the citation graph of most papers is it's not always helpful. Most of the times, if you just read that one sentence summary inside the paper, you don't need to go off and read the paper. I've had a phase where I would try to read the relevant papers. One thing I've learned is some most of the times you don't have to. If you just read that one line where the paper is summarized, that's good enough. So don't go off and read the paper unless you're curious, then by all means. I'm sure there are great papers. I'm not saying there are not good papers. If you're short on time, you don't have to read them. So I've covered this already. They use 4-layer transformer for both tagger and generator modules. Each has 4 attention heads and 5 and 2 dimensional embeddings and hidden state size. They also say the dropout value, which is really cool to see that they're actually sharing so many details here. And to highlight the numbers real quick, as you can see, it is at that time at least beating all of the 3 set approaches. During inference, as Yuvraj had already shared, some people use beam search. And here they're using beam search to decode tag sentences and targeted generation for tagger and generator, respectively. Now they use a few approaches for evaluating. One is an automated evaluation approach, and they use a classifier that is an AWD LSTM. If you are familiar with this, maybe you're coming from FastAI, and if you are, they actually use the FastAI implementation. So they use the implementation provided by FastAI to do the automated evaluation. They also do a human evaluation where it's given to judges who look at content preservation, grammatical correctness, and target attribute match and give scores. And then they also do a qualitative analysis. So they try to evaluate their model by a lot of approaches, as you can see. And I think it's great that they have covered all of these approaches as well, apart from just covering older models. I will skip this again, but you can take a read through this if you want. So they are comparing the DRG output and their model output, and also the strategy that's being used here. Uh, I found that it's mostly readable text and it's not weird text here. So you're welcome to read it through if you want. Um, awesome. I don't think there's anything else to summarize here in the remaining 2 minutes. So to conclude, the authors have introduced a task of politeness transfer, and they use the Enron dataset corpus by introducing a tag and generate approach, which is a two-staged approach for content preserving style transfer, where the source is neutral like non-polite, class and the class in the cases of politeness transfer. Automatic and human evaluations show that the approach outperforms other SOTA models at that time. It might have changed now, and their model works really well. I think there was a one point that was relevant here. So they also have additional qualitative examples and other things that they have done here. So I think they've converted from one gender to the other in the sentences. They have, I think, converted from facts to, I think it's romanticized, and then facts to humors. So these are the said approaches that it can be applied to beyond what the model does. Coming back to this, so I always end up with some suggested homework, and I would say try this approach on different problems. Implement the same as an end-to-end process. So just throw a transformer at this and see what happens. Maybe it outperforms, and you could write a paper that's better than Cornell's paper. So I think all of the authors are from Cornell's research labs. I don't think that might be true because they would have thought about it. I would encourage you to download and play with the dataset as well. And what do you do after you've done all of this? Please consider writing about it. We at Weights and Biases really like to support this. When you write it, share it on social, tag me or tag Weights and Biases, and we'll send some swag love your way. Uh, I have asked the team to send Yuvraj multiple swag over the few weeks, and they're like, no, we've sent him some stuff already. So, Yuvraj, I'll still continue reading your paper and your blog posts and fighting for that. But for others, you should check out Yuvraj's work or consider writing blog posts, not just for the sake of swag. That's more to encourage you, but that's the reason why we push for it is to really help you build a portfolio of technical writing, which I think is really helpful. That's a discussion for another time. But that's it for the paper reading group. I'll wait for 30 seconds. We've gone 2 minutes over. Sorry about that. I'll wait for 30 seconds to answer any questions. If not, I'll wrap up. And to the people that might be here still, just announcing this here. Keep an eye out. We'll be reading this book next in part of our paper reading groups. Not paper reading groups, book reading groups. I'm anxious because we're out of time and I absolutely hate not being on time. So we'll be studying the NLP with Transformers book from the Hugging Face team. I think I'm not sure if Leandro is from Hugging Face. Most probably they are, but really great authors have written this book. I'm 4 chapters through at this point. I like to read the book at least once before starting a book reading group. It'll be announced in 1 or 2 weeks. We'll start in 1 or 2 weeks. If you're interested, keep an eye out. For the paper reading group, we'll meet again in 1 month. Please consider writing about this stuff. Thanks for watching. I don't see any questions, so maybe I can wrap up. Amit is asking for Yuvraj's blog post, so let me see if I can find that link real quick. Share my screen, share the window. This is his Twitter page where he shares most of the stuff. Here's the link. Everyone watching, please follow him there because his stuff is absolutely amazing. Yuvraj, can you share your blog's link here? I don't see it in your bio. Hmm. But if you follow Yuvraj on Twitter, you'll be sorted because that's where he tweets his stuff. So I don't want to scroll through his timeline and embarrass him because I don't think cricket is embarrassing, but yep. Please follow him on Twitter and you'll find his blog post there. Amazing. I don't see any questions. So thank you for joining, everyone. I'll see you in 1 month if you just join the paper reading group, or in 2 weeks if you join the book reading group, or this week if you join the Chai live stream. I'll be doing a Chai live stream this week. So thanks for joining. Hope you have a good remaining Sunday. or Sunday night if you're from India. And yeah, I'll see you in any of our live streams. Thanks for watching.